I've done a lot of babysitting jobs over the years, but nothing, prepared me for what happened that night. It started out like any other gig. A woman named Margaret Hayes contacted me through a local babysitting app, saying she needed someone to watch her 4-year-old son, Toby, while she attended a work event. Everything seemed normal, the pay was good, the house was in a nice part of town, and Margaret herself sounded polite and professional over the phone. But something about the whole arrangement felt off. For one, she was oddly specific about the details. She insisted I arrive exactly at 7 p.m., not a minute earlier, not a minute later. She also made it clear that I shouldn't try to contact her once she left. Toby's a quiet child, she said, almost as if she was reading from a script. He's very independent. Just make sure he stays in his room, and don't worry if you don't hear much from him. That struck me as strange. Most parents want their babysitters to interact with their kid, not just leave them alone all night. But I figured maybe Toby was just shy or had trouble sleeping, so I didn't think much of it. When I arrived at the house, my unease only grew. Margaret answered the door almost immediately, like she had been waiting right by it. She barely let me step inside before handing me a printed list of rules that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Do not enter any room with a locked door. Do not open the basement door under any circumstances. Do not try to wake Toby, he needs his sleep. Do not call or text me unless it is an absolute emergency. I stared at the list, my stomach twisting. Toby's already in bed, she said hurriedly, grabbing her coat. So you probably won't even see him. Just make yourself comfortable. I'll be home around midnight. That was the first big red flag. It was 7 p.m. What kind of 4-year-old goes to bed that early? But before I could ask, she was already slipping out the door. The second the lock clicked behind her, I felt the silence pressing in on me. The house was too quiet. Not the normal quiet of a sleeping child, but a deep, unnatural stillness. No faint sounds of breathing from upstairs, no rustling of blankets, nothing. I tried to shake off the unease and decided to check on Toby. After all, if I was supposed to be watching him, I needed to at least see him. I walked upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty house. Toby's door was slightly ajar, and inside, I saw what I expected, a small bed, neatly tucked blankets, a few scattered toys, a nightlight glowing softly in the corner. But the bed? It was empty. There was no kid. No sign that anyone had even been sleeping there. My pulse spiked. I felt an eerie chill run through me as I took a step inside. The room was too neat. The toys were arranged too perfectly. It didn't feel like a child had been playing here at all. I checked the closet. Nothing. Under the bed. Empty. That's when I noticed something that made my breath hitch. There was no baby monitor. Most parents have at least one in their kids' room, especially if they leave them alone with a babysitter. But there was nothing. No sign that anyone actually monitored this room at all. I felt my heart start to pound. I turned and hurried back downstairs, pulling out my phone to text Margaret. But as my thumb hovered over the screen, I stopped. She had been so adamant that I not contact her. And suddenly, I had a gut-wrenching feeling that maybe, just maybe, she already knew there was no child in that house. My hands felt clammy as I lowered my phone. Every instinct in my body was screaming that something wasn't right. I took a deep breath, trying to rationalize. Maybe Toby had crawled into another room to sleep. Maybe Margaret had just forgotten to mention that he sometimes slept somewhere else. Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation for why the child I was supposed to be watching wasn't in his room. But deep down, I knew better. I decided to check the rest of the house. As I moved through the hallways, every shadow felt too long, too dark. The walls were bare, except for a single framed photograph in the living room, a black and white image of Margaret standing next to a man I assumed was her husband. But something about it felt off. I stared at the picture for a moment before realizing what was wrong. There was no child in the photo. No Toby. No pictures of him anywhere. It was subtle, but now that I noticed it, it was impossible to ignore. Most parents have at least one picture of their kid on the wall or on the fridge, school photos, family pictures, something. But this house? It was like no child had ever lived here. I tried to shake off the creeping dread and made my way toward the basement door. Margaret's rules flashed in my head: do not open the basement door under any circumstances. That warning felt too specific. Too deliberate. Which meant, of course, that I had to open it. My fingers hovered over the doorknob for a moment before I twisted it and slowly pushed the door open. The air that hit me was stale, thick with dust and something else, something metallic and sharp. The basement was pitch black, but as I reached for the light switch, I hesitated. Something was off. I couldn't hear the usual sounds of an empty basement, no humming of an old furnace, no creaking wood, no dripping pipes. Just silence. I turned on the light. And immediately, I wished I hadn't. The basement wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a cluttered storage space, or a place filled with old furniture and forgotten boxes. It was almost completely empty. Except for the chair. A single, wooden chair sat in the middle of the room, facing the wall. The kind of chair you'd see in an old interrogation room. The kind of chair that looked like someone had sat in it for a long, long time. And the worst part? The floor around it was scratched, deep, frantic marks that looked like they had been made by fingernails. I felt my stomach lurch. My breathing turned shallow. What the hell was this? I took a shaky step back, and that's when I saw it, something carved into the wood of the chair, scratched in jagged, desperate letters. Help me. A chill ran down my spine. I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint, so quiet, I almost thought I imagined it. A whisper. From upstairs. You're not supposed to be down there. My blood ran cold. The voice had come from upstairs, near the hallway. It wasn't loud, it was barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the house, it sliced through the air like a knife. I spun around, my breath hitching. For a long, terrifying second, I couldn't move. My legs felt cemented to the basement floor, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The only thing I could think about was the carving on the chair. Help me. I forced myself to move. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. My eyes darted around the dimly lit hallway, searching for who, or what, had spoken. But there was no one there. The house was still empty. But something was different. A door at the end of the hall, one that had been closed before, was now slightly open. A crack of darkness stretched into the hallway, beckoning. My stomach twisted. I had two choices. I could run, grab my things, fling open the front door, and never look back. But I knew deep down that I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I left without knowing the truth. So, with my entire body screaming at me to stop, I took a step forward. Then another. The floor creaked beneath me as I reached out, pushing the door open all the way. The room was completely bare. No furniture. No decorations. Just 4 empty walls and a single window, nailed shut from the outside. But that wasn't what made my breath hitch. It was the smell. That sharp, metallic tang, stronger here than anywhere else in the house. I swallowed hard, my gaze shifting to the floor. And then, I saw them, drag marks. Faint, but clear as day, stretching from the middle of the room to the doorway. Like something, or someone, had been pulled out of here. My chest tightened. Something horrible had happened in this house. Something Margaret hadn't told me. I took a step back, my mind racing. I needed to leave. Now. But as I turned toward the hallway, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I nearly jumped out of my skin. With shaking hands, I pulled it out. It was a text. From Margaret. Do not go into the basement. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. My fingers trembled as I typed back. Who is Toby? The message was delivered. 3 dots appeared on the screen. My heart pounded as I watched them flicker, waiting for her reply. Then they stopped. No response. No call. Nothing. A sudden creak echoed from behind me. I whipped around, and the basement door was open. Not a crack. Not slightly ajar. Wide. Open. The darkness beyond it felt like it was swallowing the air in the room. And then, from deep below, something moved. A slow, deliberate shuffle. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't bother locking the door, didn't even think about texting Margaret again. I just sprinted to my car, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. My tires screeched against the pavement as I sped away, my entire body buzzing with pure adrenaline. I never went back. The next day, I checked the babysitting app. Margaret's profile was gone. Deleted. No trace of her. No record of the job listing. Like she had never existed. But the house? The house was still there. And a few weeks later, I saw something on the news. A breaking report about a missing child case, one that had gone cold nearly 20 years ago. A little boy named Toby Hayes had disappeared from that very address. His body was never found. And I? I had been hired to watch a child who never existed. Or maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the first babysitter to take that job. Story number 2. I used to be a bank robber, now I work in a bank, and someone just tried to rob me. There's a certain irony in how life works. 10 years ago, I was the guy breaking into banks. Now, I'm the one sitting behind the counter, counting money like a law-abiding citizen. It wasn't supposed to be this way. When I walked away from that life, I promised myself I'd never look back. No more running, no more hiding, no more looking over my shoulder every time I heard sirens in the distance. I had done my time, 5 years in prison for armed robbery. When I got out, I wanted a fresh start. A real job. A normal life. And somehow, in the cruelest twist of fate, I ended up working at a bank. It started as a joke. My parole officer kept telling me I needed a stable job, something legitimate. I had no skills, no degree, and no real experience in anything that wasn't highly illegal. So when I saw a small, locally owned bank hiring a teller, I thought, why not? I walked into the interview expecting them to laugh me out of the room. Instead, the branch manager, an older guy named Charlie, took one look at my application and said, "Well, at least you know how banks work." And just like that, I had a job. For the past 2 years, I've been doing my best to keep my head down, keep my record clean, and prove to myself, and everyone else, that I'm not that guy anymore. And then, last Tuesday, someone tried to rob my bank. The moment the masked guy walked in, I knew. It wasn't just the way he moved, calm, calculated, controlled. It wasn't just the way his eyes darted around, scanning the security cameras, noting the exits. It was because I used to be him. And in that moment, I realized something else. This wasn't just any robbery. He was using my old cruise method. The moment the guy stepped through the door, I felt it. That gut instinct, the one I thought I had buried years ago. Most people wouldn't have noticed. To the average bank teller, he looked like any other customer, a hoodie, jeans, nothing too flashy. But I knew better. The way he walked in, slow but deliberate, keeping his head low, his hands in his pockets, it was exactly how I used to do it. He wasn't here to make a deposit. He was casing the place. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding as I instinctively glanced at the security cameras. That's when I saw it, the next telltale sign. A second guy, lingering by the entrance. It was happening. Right here, right now. A robbery. And not just any robbery. My old crew's method. My blood ran cold. The approach, the timing, the positioning, it was textbook. The way I had planned jobs back in the day, the way I had taught my crew before everything fell apart. There were two options here: either some random low-level criminals had studied our old jobs and copied the pattern, or this was someone from my past. My hand started shaking as I reached under the counter, pressing the silent alarm. I knew what was coming next. Sure enough, hoodie guy approached my station. "Hey, man. I need to make a withdrawal." My stomach twisted. Not because of what he said, but because I recognized his voice. It took me a second, but the second I placed it, the air in my lungs froze. It was Ryan. Ryan was part of my old crew. Ryan, the guy I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. The guy who was supposed to be serving 15 years. The guy who had taken the fall for me. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears as I looked up at him, and that's when I knew. He recognized me too. His eyes widened just slightly, just enough for me to see the flash of shock and something else. Something dangerous. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a robbery. This was personal. For a split second, everything froze. Ryan and I locked eyes, and in that brief moment, I saw everything. The years behind bars. The betrayal. The rage simmering just beneath the surface. I had always wondered if Ryan blamed me. I had always hoped he understood why I walked away, why I left that life behind. But now, standing here with a mask half pulled over his face, a hand twitching inside his pocket where I knew a gun was hidden, I got my answer. This wasn't just a robbery. This was payback. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You sure about this, Ryan?" I said low enough that only he could hear. His jaw tightened. His fingers flexed. "Shut up," he muttered. The second guy, his partner, was getting nervous near the entrance. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, glancing at the cameras. I knew the silent alarm had already been triggered. Cops would be here in minutes. But I also knew Ryan. And I knew that if he was here, he didn't come just to steal some cash. "I didn't rat you out," I whispered, my hands still gripping the counter. "You know that, right?" Ryan let out a sharp breath, like he was trying to hold something back. "Doesn't matter," he said. But his voice wavered. That's when I realized, he was hesitating. He had waited 10 years for this moment. He had probably rehearsed every way he could get revenge, every way he could make me suffer the way he had. And now, standing here in front of me, he was unsure. The old Ryan, the guy I used to know, was still in there somewhere. I could use that. Outside, I heard sirens. Getting closer. His partner near the door was panicking now. "Ryan, let's go, man, this ain't worth it." But Ryan wasn't moving. I took a breath. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. "You can walk away. Right now. You already lost 10 years, you want to lose the rest?" His hand twitched inside his pocket. I could almost feel the weight of the gun he was holding, the way his fingers probably rested on the trigger. Then, he did something I didn't expect. He took a step back. Just one. Then another. And then, he turned and ran. His partner bolted after him, both of them shoving through the glass doors just as the cops pulled up. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Officers jumped out, yelling commands, guns drawn. But Ryan and his guy disappeared into the alley before they could be caught. I stood there, hands still gripping the counter, my heart hammering in my chest. I had just talked down a man who had every reason to want me dead. And as I watched the cops swarm the street, I realized something else. Ryan could have shot me. He could have ended everything right then and there. But he didn't. Because no matter how much anger he had, how much betrayal he felt, somewhere deep down, he still saw me as his brother. And maybe, just maybe, that meant there was still hope for him, too.